To Craig Green. He's a constitutional law scholar happening at Temple University. And Craig is going to talk to us today about helping us understand what may be happening next in the next phase of this election. Craig, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
No problem. I'm going to put you a bit on the spot because we have some breaking news, and I'm going to just read it off my phone here. From our White House team, President Trump's campaign has tasked David Bossie. He was Trump's deputy campaign manager in 2016 to lead the efforts in challenging election results in several states from Arizona, Pennsylvania, according to a person familiar with the decision. Do you happen to know who he is and what his background is and what we may be expecting? We know that the Trump administration has been looking for someone who, is a James Baker type. For those who don't remember or know who James Baker is, he was involved in the 2000 election fight between Al Gore and George W. Bush.
No, I don't know Mr. Bossie at all well, beyond what you already have said. But it isn't the first person they've tried to find to play this James Baker role and try to unsettle the election counts that are going on across the country in a number of swing states. The main problem is that whether you can find a James Baker or you can't, the real deficit at the moment is evidence and legal argument. And Republicans as prominent as Chris Christie, Rick Santorum, and others have stood up and said that to make allegations, inflammatory allegations, without any evidence or information is a really troubling development. So I think we'll have to see whether this new personality and this new expertise brings anything more to the table than what has been shown so far.
As we went on the air at 2 o'clock today, there were at least 7 lawsuits filed by the Trump administration or the GOP. That number could have gone up since we've been talking. A federal court challenge was settled to allow more poll watchers to be closer inside the Pennsylvania Convention Center there. The DNC told NBC News last night that they were sending lawyers to Harrisburg today to preemptively put forth get their ducks in a row in case there is some sort of challenge there from the state house level. What is the legal strategy here for the Trump administration?
Sure. It's not so different from at the end of a basketball game when you foul to sort of extend the clock, or perhaps try an onside kick in football. These are, at least to all appearances at present, these are relatively desperate measures, efforts to distract attention from the other really important work that's happening right now that, of course, your channel and other channels are reporting on, which is counting the votes. And that's the really key ingredient here, is as long as the votes continue to be counted, the lawyers will stay as a sideshow. The only time that people really need to start being concerned, I think, about legal challenges and lawyers is if there ever is a time when the courts stop the votes from being counted. And there is not any reason that I have seen in any of the news reports over the last week to see that sort of thing would happen at all. All of the lawsuits that I have in mind in Pennsylvania and all the ones that have been filed in other places, I think fall in this category of almost a distraction, an effort to draw attention away from unfavorable, quite frankly, vote totals accruing in swing states.
You know what? I think it's important to note this has happened before. Presidential elections and local elections and statewide elections as well. There are legal challenges. They are put forth when the races are close, or if somebody on either side says that, they're not happy with the result. But that's pretty normal. But in this case, you're saying that these cases don't really have much merit. There isn't a lot of evidence to support some of the challenges that they're putting forward.
That's a strong point. I think the thing that feels so different to all of your viewers this time is the mixture and the kinds of ballots that are being used. I mean, what an extraordinary election where there are so many mail-in ballots and on-the-day ballots and ballots that are being sent and dropped into boxes. This is a very uncommon set of procedures, but behind it is an institutional framework of vote counters, who are the same kind of vote counters we've had in every election, and indeed I suspect we'll continue to have in elections. And those people go out there and work with the kind of integrity, character, and transparency that mark American democracy. Yes, quite true. There are always small challenges in this sort of thing. People may not remember Jill Stein challenged the vote in Wisconsin in 2016. It changed 130 votes. So again, you have a Republican like Scott Walker saying a recount in Wisconsin is not going to change 20,000 votes. And I think as long as the votes continue to be counted, my strong suspicion is that the margins will swallow the errors. That whatever small technical concerns that anyone can raise about the electoral process, hopefully, and I believe, as in previous elections, the margins that will be at stake will be large enough to swallow any errors that can possibly be found. And I have to say again, based on what we've seen so far and the kind of evidence, not the kind of rhetoric that we've heard, I just don't think there's anything extraordinary or irregular or seriously contestable about any large fraction of the current American vote, which is remarkable given how different this vote has felt to the voters who participated and indeed the officials who are responsible for counting the votes.
Yeah, it's amazing that everything has gone so smoothly, especially in the circumstances that we've had in the past several months with the pandemic and such. You kind of hit on this a little bit, but some Trump allies, both politicians and some Trump-friendly media organizations, have suggested that the Pennsylvania legislature, which is under Republican control, should consider choosing their own electors that could favor choosing President Trump if he was not to be declared the winner of the state. Is that possible or even legal?
Yeah, I think the thing to say to everyone is everyone in Pennsylvania assumes that the candidate who wins the vote will get to choose the electors and therefore be counted in the election. It is technically arguable that even after all the votes counted up, and they come up, let's imagine they come up for Vice President Biden, that somehow at the last second, the General Assembly of Pennsylvania could all of a sudden strip away the electors and send an entirely different slate than what the people of Pennsylvania voted for. I have to say there is a legal argument for such a thing to happen, but I cannot imagine anyone in Pennsylvania politics taking that proposal seriously. I just can't imagine anyone would stand for it. Frankly, it's a really sad sign about the American state of politics that anyone could even mention it in public, this possibility. Imagine what an election would be for the future when every legislature could just think about snatching the presidential electoral vote away from the people. I just think America wouldn't stand for such a thing.
And there have been some flashbacks for people to the 2000 election between former Vice President Al Gore and President George W. Bush when the vote count in Florida was challenged. Will this wind up in the Supreme Court this time around, the U.S. Supreme Court?
So I worked for Judge Merrick Garland that year, and we watched that election nonstop for a month. And the main thing people forget again is that margin was 500 votes. And that's a rare circumstance where the margin was that small. I have to say, if the U.S. Supreme Court got involved in this election based on the evidence, again, that is available and that seems to be likely to produce, I think that would be the most remarkable thing, much more profound, dramatic, and provocative than what happened in Bush v. Gore. And Bush v. Gore was plenty controversial at the time, but I think to get involved in this election would be all the more so, not least because, of course, Mitch McConnell and the Senate Republicans just put the sixth conservative justice on the court only days ago, weeks ago. And so I think this is a situation where the U.S. Supreme Court has no legal reason, no constitutional reason to get involved in the election, and they would be much better off for themselves institutionally, for the Constitution, and for the country if they would sit this one out, which I think is probably what they will do.
Now, let's take a look outside of Pennsylvania. There's at least one lawsuit filed in Nevada. Georgia will likely have to have a recount, and we could expect some litigation there. What will this amount to across the nation? And you kind of talked about this a little bit earlier, but I think it's good to kind of hit back on the point of what's happening in other states.
Yeah, I think that's right. And there are some suggestions that Nevada has different issues than some other places. There are going to be recounts. So that's what you mentioned in Georgia. I think that's quite right. The Trump campaign has promised there will be a recount in Wisconsin. With the Georgia vote, which is really very small, it's conceivable that some number of votes would move. But of course, you can't predict which way. Jill Stein, the Green Party candidate, challenged the election in Wisconsin, and she moved 130 votes in favor of Donald Trump. So I think the recount, the fact is the electoral vote counting processes in a lot of states, maybe every state, are so well managed and so well controlled and so transparent. You're not going to lose or change very many votes, and not in a predictable direction. The question of lawsuits, I think those issues, and especially in Nevada, it doesn't look like the margin there is going to be so close that a lawsuit of any plausible, you have to find a fraction of the vote you can challenge that meets the margin between the candidates. And I just don't see that at the present time. The margin in Nevada, I think, is getting larger by the day, maybe by the hour. And so I think that any sort of legal challenges, in a certain sense, they're already late because the vote counts are continuing to rack up. And at this point, we don't even really have a clear legal theory what it would even be. We have a lot of rhetoric, but actually not a lot of evidence. and actually not even a lot of arguments that would even plausibly produce some kind of scenario like a Bush v. Gore or something much worse in the 2020 election.
Craig Green, it should be an interesting couple of days and weeks as this election stretches on. Constitutional law scholar from Temple University, thank you so much for your time and helping us and our viewers better understand what may be coming down the pike. Thanks for your time.
Thanks very much.